Hello and welcome to Learn, Do, Become Radio. This is Aaliyah Clausen and I'm one of the team members here. And at Learn, Do, Become, we help people who are drowning in the details of life create simple systems so they can do what matters most. And this podcast is all about dealing with the backlog that so many of us experience, whether it's with papers or emails, digital files, photos. I think all of us have something in our lives that just feels like it's weighing us down. It's this huge pile of physical or digital things that needs to be addressed at some point. And oftentimes it's what derails us from getting organized and from moving forward because our brains are so preoccupied with dealing with all the stuff that's accumulated for years and sometimes even decades, and it's hard for us to know can we move past this and continue getting organized without feeling like we're forgetting these things that are important to us but have been just sitting and waiting and building up for so long. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's podcast. And I would highly recommend checking out the show notes for this podcast because I've compiled several resources from our Learn, Do, Become archives that touch on backlog and how to deal with it. So if you would like to see all the links to the resources that I'll mention, you can find them at learndobecome.com/episode 296. And everything will be linked there for you throughout the show notes. And then also at the very bottom, we have a related link section, and that has everything right there in one place for you. Now, when we're getting organized, it's tempting to think that the first thing we need to get rid of before we can move on is backlog, as I kind of mentioned before. And I used to have this exact same mindset when it came to dealing with the backlog, and it felt really frustrating to not have the time or energy to get to everything from the past while I was trying to sort through all of the current things that were coming into my life. And then, of course, it felt even more impossible to try to squeeze time in for the backlogged items when I was going to school and working on big projects for work, trying to create meaningful relationships with the people around me and in my family. I just felt like I couldn't do it all. And this is where I really needed a perspective shift. And I talked with my mom about it, and she gave me some great advice and some great ideas. And I also went back to the very basics when it came to setting up our current projects list and also giving ourselves projects to work on in the future so that they're off of our current list, but they're safe in a future projects list. And once I had that mindset shift and I let myself think, okay, I can let go of the backlog for a little bit. It doesn't mean I'm forgetting it. It doesn't mean I'm leaving it behind forever, but it means that I'm only focusing on what's incoming and what currently needs my attention through my current projects list and my routines list. When I'm able to stay on top of those things, then I can slowly start bringing in some of the backlogged items as future projects on my current projects list. So that's just a little mindset shift that I had to have. And I would actually say it was a pretty big one. It wasn't super small, but it was super life-changing because now when anything comes up in my life that I think, I really should deal with that, when I take a step back and I realize that's actually many sub-projects underneath the umbrella of a giant project, or that would easily take me 50 hours to work through a project like that. Instead of shutting down or feeling overwhelmed, I can assess the situation and say, all right, I know how to break this down. I have my step system and my command central here to back me up. And then I can move forward and start putting piece by piece into my current projects list and onto my next actions list. But it's not instant. I'm really aware of the time, the energy, and everything else that I have going on. And then I'm able to bring it into my life when the time is right. So as I'm going to keep going through this podcast, I'm going to be sharing 6 different excerpts from little show notes and different podcasts that we've done throughout the years. And I've linked all of the 6 podcasts on the show notes page. Again, you can find that at learndobecome.com/episode 296, and that will have all the related links for you. And the first podcast that I want to mention as one of the most helpful resources that really helped me get in the right mindset was called A Shorter List Today. And April shared that she frequently hears this kind of thought and sentiment from our community members. They say, I love the idea of a small list, but if I don't make more headway on my tasks each week, they'll get backlogged and either there will be consequences or I'll be totally overwhelmed the following week or both. And maybe you felt that way too, where you feel like if I don't have a huge list and I'm not constantly doing so many things at the same time and just back to back to back, I'm going to have even more backlog to deal with, and then it's going to make me feel even more stressed. But then my mom said something that has really stuck with me. She says, it isn't easy to lighten our lists. It often feels incredibly counterintuitive. I had to do this a couple weeks ago when I had too many expectations for myself and didn't even realize that was the problem until my incredibly insightful doctor pointed it out. As soon as I lightened my load and visibly made my list smaller, my body responded, and I can't even explain what a gift that is. So this podcast and post offers some incredible insights into why many of us believe that we need to have these long lists and check so many things off in order to be productive. And this is a really great resource as well for doing personal mindset work before you address the backlog. So if you're thinking, well, I can't let go of the backlog, I have to keep it on my current list. If I have 100,000 emails, I need to always have those to deal with right now, because if I let those go, then I'm never going to get to them. And I'll talk about emails actually in a second, because that's one of the biggest points that people come to us about. And I think when we look at our lists and we realize that we have too much going on and that it's not sustainable long term, and that we're not actually getting to the root of the backlog, that's when we can really have that shift, and we can really have that change of mind, change of heart to say, okay, I'm going to trust the process. I'm going to lighten my list, and then I'm going to be able to actually do more once I'm giving myself less to work on at any given time. So again, I recommend checking out that podcast. And just another reminder, this podcast is going to be me talking about 6 other awesome podcasts, because we have so many awesome resources that touch on backlog and how to address that. And I want to make sure that I kind of collect them all in one place, so that after listening to this podcast and something sticks out to you, you can dive even deeper into that resource that makes the most sense for you in your current situation. Okay, so now that we have our mindset work done, what do we do about the fact that our minds keep spinning still, and our minds keep telling us, what about this? What about this that you're forgetting? What about this project you wanted to do 10 years ago? What about these photos you inherited from your grandparents? There's so many things that build up in our minds and also in our hearts, where we have these emotions attached to all these big tasks and projects. And this is where podcast 220 is a super helpful resource. It's called 3 Organizing Skills That Actually Make a Difference. And it talks about the process of doing a mind sweep and getting everything out of our heads and into our step system. And this quote comes from the podcast show notes page and illustrates how sweeping our minds of all the stuff that we're thinking about can actually help us with the backlog. So the quote that is from April, my mom, says, "The mountain of to-dos can sometimes feel overwhelming, but when we know how to address this kind of situation, our minds can feel calm and we can create a clear path forward. This is one of the most incredible aspects of the Step Command Central. There's a place for doing a mind sweep and getting all of the items out of our heads and subsequent places for projects, one-time tasks, routines, and next actions that are identified from the mind sweep." In this podcast, Ali and I both shared instances in our lives where we were dealing with health challenges, busy schedules, or interruptions to our day-to-day schedules, but we were able to work through the backlog and identify what was most urgent and needed our attention the soonest. I think this podcast is a great resource for giving us a reminder to do the mind sweep, because when we're able to identify all the different projects and tasks and routines that are swirling inside of our heads, we can create a solid plan for tackling them one by one when the time is right. So when we try to take on the backlog of items while we're going about our everyday lives, there's a really big chance that we're going to overload ourselves and not actually make the progress that we hoped we would. And while this podcast just gives a lot of great ideas for organizing and figuring out how to calm our minds in this way, you're also welcome to search on our website for the term mind sweep, and you'll find some other resources about that. We have podcasts strictly dedicated to the mind sweep, but I love this idea of being able to write everything down in a physical or digital format and then sort it between things that are projects, tasks, goals, routines, and so forth. And then when you're ready to add more projects to your current project list, you have this big reference list of next in line and someday projects that you've pulled from your mind sweep, and you've categorized them into saying, hey, I can't do all these projects that are in my head right now. These ones are going on my next in line projects list. These projects are going on my someday projects lists, and I know that it's safe and it's ready for me in the future when I'm able to pull from these someday lists. All right, and now that we've shared ideas on what to do with mindset work and then doing a mind sweep to help our mind feel calm, I want to talk about two of the biggest areas of application that have been helpful in my own life. And these are also areas that have resonated a lot with our steppers and our other community members. And the first is photo organization, specifically digital photo organization. I did a podcast on this. It's podcast 188. Again, they're all linked on the show notes. And in this episode, I detailed my routine for processing all the new photos in my life. And there's a video on that page showing my process. And actually tonight, I'm going to be doing that process in my personal life because we do it every 2 or 3 months. We take all the photos off our phones. So I'm recording this on the last day of the month. And in the evening, that's when I'm going to be taking the photos off my phone and doing the exact same process that I'm talking about in this podcast. And here's a little bit about what I wrote in this podcast show notes, specifically about backlog when I was talking about my photo process. I said many of us have smaller sub-projects that we need to address when it comes to photos from the past or a lack of an organizational system in regards to our photos. Here are a few things that might need to happen as examples. These would all be individual sub-projects under the umbrella of, quote, total photo organization as the large end goal project. These might go on your next in line or someday projects list, depending on your ability to work on them. And the examples that I shared are go through old files of photos and assign names and dates for consistency. And again, this is digital photo organization. You can look at purchasing an external hard drive and then transferring all your digital photos to those new hard drives. You could move photos into special digital albums to categorize big life events, vacations, trips, and other categories you might like to reference. You could research scanning tools to help you digitize all of your printed photos. And finally, you could ask friends or parents if they have any other pictures that you might not have access to yet and create a plan to acquire these photos in order to, quote, complete your collection. So as you can see, there are a lot of smaller projects that can come to mind from the overall project of photo organization. And even as I'm looking at this list, if we were to simply put on my own current projects list, do my digital photo organization, of course that's not going to get done in a month's time frame. Of course that's going to feel overwhelming every time I look at the title of that project and I start to think, I have a decade plus of digital photos to go through. How am I supposed to do that as a current project? So when we can go through our photos, in this case, this example, and say, this isn't just one big current project to organize my digital photos. This might be 5 to 10 smaller sub-projects that will then be broken down into simple next actions. And it doesn't seem quite as daunting when we do it this way. And this is how I've dealt with the personal backlog of digital photos. This is how I've dealt with emails, which we'll get to in a second. So when you're able to take a step back and say, I need to not put this ginormous project on my projects list to handle the backlog, I need to segment it into reasonable, smaller projects that could be done within a month's time, or that I could do in maybe a month or 2 months, spread out a little bit. But I wrote in the show notes, this is how I've tackled my goal of getting all my favorite family photos onto Google Photos over time. I started this project in August 2021, and I'm just finishing this project right now in April 2023. So it took me 2.5 years to handle the backlog of digitizing some family photos with my siblings. They kind of helped scan them, and then we put them into a digital format that we could all access. And then I went through all the archives of about a decade plus of digital photos. Actually, I think it was 20 years at that point because we had some from 2003. So from 2003 to 2023, I was dealing with the backlog and I was going through the digital files and picking my very favorites that would go into Google Photos and then categorizing them in total albums that we could reference really easily. And again, I have a lot more detailed about this process and how I do my digital photo organization in that original podcast, which is linked on the show notes. But I wrote at the end, one might look at this timeline and think that it took me way too long to accomplish this project. But in reality, I was able to use small next actions to break the project down into manageable, bite-sized pieces. I was able to make progress on this project in the midst of a lot of life changes. Getting married, moving a couple times, finishing up and graduating from college, and expecting a baby this summer. And that baby is now 2. And I'm so proud of the progress that I've made on this project. I was never stressed out by the thought of needing to simplify certain parts of it during the busy seasons of life. And I love that this process of breaking down my projects into even simpler sub-projects allowed me to work on it in the most busy and just really hectic times of life where I had so much going on and I was trying to figure out so many new things all at once. But I was able to have this consistent project going in the background, broken down into smaller projects that were actually manageable to complete each month. So I hope that gives you some encouragement when it comes to dealing with the really big projects, because I know all of us have them in some different way, shape, or form. Maybe you have a lot of physical items you need to process and handle, or maybe it's a lot of digital clutter, or maybe it's a mix of both and you feel like you have 20,000 backlog projects. But I want to give you encouragement that it's totally possible when you make them small enough that it actually becomes something you can do on a regular basis as your next actions. And this kind of goes right into our free emails to zero training. I linked the training here on the page because this is one of the most helpful tools that I've used to eliminate the backlog of emails and then create a really good routine going forward to handle all of the incoming emails that land in my inbox. And this email training is about 13 minutes in a video format. And April will teach you that instead of using your email inbox as a holding space for everything, you'll file your emails into a safely stored folder. And once all the backlog is out of your main email inbox, April will teach you strategies for processing all the new emails that come your way each day. And then you'll develop a routine to handle all the incoming emails and the corresponding tasks associated with those emails that are coming your way. And then it becomes one of your next in line or someday projects to handle the backlog of all of your safely stored emails. Those thousands or maybe even tens of thousands, 100,000, who knows, however many you might have, all of those emails are patiently waiting for you. And then when you're able to do a next action of spending maybe 10 to 20 minutes sorting them and processing them, you'll know exactly where to go and look. And instead of that being one of your current projects, you might consider it having that as a routine on your routines list, where once you put all of the backlog into a safely stored email folder, for example, you could have a routine of every Sunday night when we're watching our favorite TV show, I'm going to sit here and work on my email inbox, and I'm going to spend 30 minutes just sorting through the backlog with my TV show in the background, something like that. And obviously it doesn't have to be that exact same scenario. But when you can make it a little routine that goes on in the background, you can chip away at the backlog while you're doing something else that you enjoy. So just want to send that little encouragement your way. And Barbara, I was talking about this in our Step Mastery Facebook group, and Barbara said, I have to give a little plug for emails to zero and a different way to look at it. The vast amount of emails in your storage can seem so overwhelming, and everyone feels that they have to get that to zero. It isn't true. Unless you're running out of storage and need to clear space, they can be archived for later. Emails to zero to me is dealing with my emails daily by extracting the tasks and then either filing them for later reference or deleting them. You can learn that skill and immediately implement that on new incoming emails. All those old emails are like level 4 papers. They've gone dormant. And by learning to deal with the new emails, Inbox Zero training gives great ideas on that. Now my inbox can stay clean whether or not I get back to my level 4 dormant emails. They are there, but not stored in my inbox. So I loved this encouragement from Barbara on dealing with the email backlog. And if Barbara can do it, Barbara is wonderful. She's one of our risers and steppers. I know you can do it too. So just some encouragement from one stepper / a riser / becomer in the community. Encouragement from Barbara to you. And I just hope that gives a little insight that it's totally possible to handle the backlog and feel really encouraged about dealing with it. And this next resource that I linked here on the page is podcast 133, and it's called Characteristics of a Successful Project. And it was a little recap of a 4 weeks to finish course that we did a couple years ago. And in this episode, April shared these 2 community testimonials and wrote, "Ignoring the piles of stuff often feels like the easy route, but honestly, when you build your command central and realize you have the tools to actually get out of the overwhelm and stay out of the overwhelm, that feels so much better." And then April shared these 2 testimonials, and the first person was saying that the black hole of all of their stuff that had accumulated, they could finally see that there was a finish line, that it wasn't just a never-ending pile of stuff. They could actually get to the end of it and finish processing everything. And the second person said, #win, my brain is calmer, things are starting to click, and I've accomplished more in these past 2 weeks of setting up and implementing their Command Central than in the last 6 months. I can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I loved hearing from both of these people a couple years ago, because when we showed them how they can break down their projects and how they can process the items in the backlog as one of their current projects, when the time is appropriate to bring the backlog onto their current list, that it's totally possible to start chipping away at the papers, the emails, the digital items, whatever it might be, and then actually have it disappear. All those things that were just building up forever can go away, but we have to follow this simple process in order to make it one of our current projects and actually give it the time and energy that it needs. All right, and this final section comes from podcast 104, and it's called What to Do When You Feel Overwhelmed by Tasks. So this podcast has some great resources that aren't strictly related to backlog. So if you're also looking for more tips on how to handle the general overwhelm, this is a great place to start. And this is what April shared in regards to using the 2-minute rule. She says, David Allen teaches it in his books, and it works every day for me. If you can do something in 2 minutes or less, you do it. You don't write it down. Now, sometimes when you're returning from a vacation or catching up on backlog, you have something like 20 2-minute tasks. I get it, but it does save time in the long run and helps build that momentum when you do those 2 minutes or less tasks. Now, when we are going through the backlog, we're going to find likely a lot of 2-minute tasks and even more 10 to 20 minute next action type of tasks buried in the emails or papers or other items that we're going through. And instead of feeling like we need to take action on every single item right away, especially if we don't have the time right now to do all those tasks, we're going to create a list of all of them that we're finding. So this might be something that goes on your mind to sweep, or maybe you decide to have a future next actions tasks list where you categorize them by context like home, computer, phone, email, errands to discuss, etc. And when you have this list of tasks that could be completed flexibly, where nothing's urgent, they're all just things that could be done at any time, you're able to pull from this list. It's almost like your next in line, next actions list. That's what I like to refer to it as. So if that's a helpful way to look at it, you could have it as a little secondary next actions list where you have your current one that you work from each week. And then when you're looking at the list and you say, well, I have some time to run errands, but I have nothing on my list right now, you could turn to your secondary list of tasks that are totally flexible from the backlog and say, I'm going to do 2 of these errands right now because I have the time and energy to do so. And then there's also the idea that I shared in this podcast, 277, which is called Turning Tiny Tasks into Big Wins, the 2-minute rule in action. And this podcast has some great resources to show you that you can actually group your 2-minute tasks into a project format. And I shared examples from my own life about how I had a lot of things around my house that I wanted to get done. But while I was sick and pregnant, I wasn't able to do all the random tasks around my house. So while I was laying on the couch, super sick, I pulled out my phone and I started writing down underneath a little project on my next in line list, do a bunch of the household 2-minute tasks. And that became one of my projects. And then I put a bunch of the items underneath it as the next actions. So things were like putting away the printer ink refill that we bought, picking up one of the pieces of art that fell behind the piano, but I needed to scoot the piano over, washing the shower curtain, reorganizing the under the bed storage, all these random things that were building up and kind of felt like backlog within our own house. That's what I put on my little project of doing all the household tasks. And then I was able to combine those all in one place. And then when I had time to actually work on that project and I felt good enough to do them, I was able to say, all right, these are my next actions to do all these tasks that are safe on this list. So again, I've linked this podcast and there's a full podcast all about how I turn these tiny tasks into their project and kind of collected all the tasks in one place. So like I said, this podcast has a lot of initial starting ideas. And then if you want to dive deeper into anything, whether it's learning about how I do my digital photo organization, or you want to do our emails to zero training, or you want to learn how to make a shorter list and do more of the mindset side of things, I've linked all of these things on our show notes page for you. Again, that's learndobecome.com/episode 296. And I thought this would just be a great way to say, all right, if anyone's dealing with a backlog, here is a podcast to give you encouragement that it's totally possible, you can do it, and then it's kind of a choose your own adventure after this podcast. You go decide what help you need, what resources you need, and they're all there for you to choose from. So thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you enjoy it. And if there's something you want to share about things that might have stuck out to you, or if you have a plan that you want to share for how you're going to tackle a certain kind of backlog in your own life, we'd love to hear from you in the comment section of the show notes page, or you're welcome to share a post on our free Learn to Become Facebook group. And you can find that at learndobecome.com/FB family, FB for Facebook. So that's the link to our free community Facebook group that everyone is welcome to join. And then if you'd like even more support when it comes to creating your current projects list, your next actions list, and really getting that system streamlined so that you can have your Command Central up and running and you feel really good about how all the details are being managed in your life, we have our STEP program with all the details at learndobecome.com/STEP program. And if anyone's new to Learn to Become, STEP stands for Steps to Everyday Productivity, and it's our signature organizing program here at Learn to Become. All right, that is it for today's podcast. Thanks again for joining, and all the show notes can be found at learndobecome.com/episode 296. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time here on Learn to Become Radio.